Okay, and then I'll make that available to the town. Okay, so we will officially call this to order 4:05. So first item on here, so just so everybody knows, Scott is going to be a little late and he asked me to take over in the meantime. So, and Kendra Jo is with us and has only until a little before 5 when she has another meeting. So I don't want to waste anybody's time. So first item is approval of the minutes from the previous meeting of January 14.
Sounds good to me.
So I'll take that as a motion to approve.
Yes.
Wendell, Pete, you're the only other voting board member on here. Are you okay with approving them as well? Or
Approved.
okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye, okay. Second item on here was just an update from our last meeting, the conversation with Police Chief Willis. And he did go along with his Bob Bickmore from the town IT department and Brian Lippold, I think, made their presentation to the Board of Selectmen. And while they made the case of trying to get consulting services for the broader connecting all municipal buildings, I think the board approved connecting the high school, approved the engineering or consulting work to map out what would be needed to connect the high school to the town office. Is that correct, Matt?
I thought they were talking about connecting the Bar Harbor municipal office and police department to the town
Well,
office.
it is for the police department's use, but it's connecting the fiber from the town office or the municipal office in Northeast Harbor, where the police department is, to the high school, where Bar Harbor's police department would be connecting. So it
Okay.
is establishing that connection, but it would not be going to, for instance,
Not directly. So the link, yeah, the link may or may not go through the high school, but that's the general part that the town would pay for as opposed to Bar Harbor, yes.
okay.
They could also use some of the 12 extra fibers we have here, but I think they want to do their own thing, so that's okay.
And so, Matt, that was approved by the select
Right.
board to do that, right?
That was approved, and I think Jim or Chief Willis in particular that is the critical piece to him. So I think he wanted to make sure that got approved, and I think people were pretty enthusiastic about it. I did let them know that this committee was in support of that, and so it looks like the further build out will probably be a phase 2, hopefully sooner rather than later.
Okay, but not as a part of this initial plan, so,
I don't believe so, no.
okay. Okay, so our third item here was to engage with Kendra Jo and Island Institute about the next step for a community engagement process. So Kendra Jo, what should we do?
Well, so well, after the last meeting, I was just kind of processing it and jotting some notes. And I mean, I think that there are a couple of pieces. I know that there's been work done in the past, specifically around Tilson, and I did reach out to Tilson, and they, said that this isn't the only community that has something from, the 2015-16 time, and are looking to kind of just lay fresh eyes on it, see what's changed, see what's different now, what's the same. So they're willing to have that conversation. I know that there are, feelings locally about Tilson's product and whether they are the firm to kind of go with to move forward. And I don't think that having a conversation with their head of broadband is Adam Quinlan now. And, I think having that conversation and just seeing what that would, cost or what they would be willing to do just to update that would be, just to kind of open that door and then close it if needed. And it would just provide a little bit more information for the community, knowing that you have some pieces there that are evergreen. They aren't going to change. and then you have some that definitely have. The other piece is, I guess, starting to understand both. Sorry, go ahead.
Before you go further, so
Sure.
with that piece, should one of us contact Tilson and Adam Quinlan to get a better sense of what would be involved and any costs associated?
Yes, thank you for that. Actually, that was going to be my question. That's why I said all of that was, I was initially just going to direct him right to you, Kathy, but then I wanted to double check tonight and see if there was someone that would prefer to be connected with Adam to move forward.
Okay. So we
Don't all jump at once.
I know. I'm happy to do that, to find out what the specifics are. So, and if I go on to Tilson Technologies, will I find his contact info on their website?
I'll just do a quick email connection
Okay, that would be
between both of
okay.
you. Great. And then I think the other is starting to understand both from a resident standpoint, but also from a select board standpoint, what's the capacity to implement something, to take steps forward. So we know the options of working with incumbents, fiber, owning, operating, having a shared partnership. I need to go back and look at kind of the RDOF map of MDI and see what was placed here. But having a little bit better understanding of just what the political will is, I guess. I mean, Matt, I know you're here, from the select board as well, and there were things that were said in the last meeting that I was like, wow, they're interested towards fiber, and then there were other things that I heard that was whoa, we just need to fill in the gaps that we have left. So knowing those two things, that can be done via surveying your community to really understand what everyone is thinking, is looking for from this committee. But also, I think the select board typically has an idea of what the tolerance for that is, especially when you're looking at something as heavy of a lift as full fiber to the premise universal service, that kind of thing.
I think the other bit, what's sort of a hindrance, is just sort of our whole budgeting process for the town meeting style of government. There's a lot of great things about it, but one of the biggest obstacles is you always have to be planning you're a year out from any decisions all the time, basically, which can be, even for, like, if we just want to do a small engineering or study or something, knowing, well, we've got to wait X number of months to bring the voters to get it approved. That tends to slow things down a bit. So I'm thinking, like, for example, at this year's town meeting, we'll have some questions about, like, a new emergency services building for fire and police and things like that. That's not going to be inexpensive. So honestly, depending on what we end up with for, like, potential price tags and what options we want to go with, it may be, just the reality of it is, it may be a few years before taxpayers are willing to take on that additional debt. But even, it's funny because the incarnation of this committee back 3-4 years ago, everyone was very excited about exploring complete fiber to the premises. Mm-hmm. And we had other options, like just sort of the build out dark fiber and get someone else to come in and finish it. But at the time, I think it was about a $13 million option. And this committee was sort of very gung-ho about that at that point. But we were tasked with, well, that could be several years building out a project like that. Let's get work with Spectrum to fill in the gap in the meantime. But I think kind of unknowingly what we did when we brought Spectrum to those people, as maddening as the cable company is, for most people, their service is adequate. And now their enthusiasm for fiber has sort of died down a bit. So the good part about that, though, is I think it might allow you to do a project in phases. Whereas before, when there was this huge gap in the community with, on the tail end of DSL lines, I think it makes it more feasible if we were to do things in phases, which also might make it more, obviously long run, you're going to pay more, but year to year, it keeps it a little more budget friendly for the taxpayers.
Yeah.
We've just got to explore all our options and get some rough ideas about associated costs.
Yeah, absolutely. And correct me if I'm wrong, Kathy, are you, is Mount Desert going to be in the second cohort for Vetro Fiber Maps CARES program?
We're supposed to. My conversations with Brian Mefford were that, yes, we are lined up to do that. The last connections I had with him said that they thought they would be starting in later January, early February. And I haven't heard from him.
That hasn't happened.
In weeks. But from what I understand from somebody recently was that they were still accepting people to engage in that second cohort.
Yeah, so they have 10 town spots. I just connected them with another community and it sounded like they had three spots left. And I thought that he had mentioned Mount Desert, so I just wanted to double check on this end. They definitely have not started their second cohort yet. So I can ping Brian just to say, hey, just send something out to communities that are waiting.
Yeah,
I see him fairly regularly. Great. And I think what that will do is provide some of that information that you're talking about, Matt. If there'll be estimates, right? Like you won't have a firm number until you dot all your I's and cross your T's with a provider and a contractor, but it will let you see and understand, if we did sections at a time, what would those costs be? And then the town can decide if, do you roll out phase 1 to the people who have no service right now, or do you roll out phase 1 to the people where it's the premise density would make that profit margin make sense? And I feel like communities that have adequate service from Spectrum and, maybe some pockets of consolidated, they have that opportunity to decide because the premise dense area is adequate enough for now. But those voters understand that they'll get it eventually, but there's a strong need somewhere else. And that, if in phase 2, people want to really vote for it and say, that's it, we've had enough, do all the phases, then at least you've already connected the first and you've proven that structure and you've proven that model. And so we definitely see that. And I think the Vetro Fiber Map will give the committee the opportunity to just play around with those numbers and play around with kind of, where would it be the most costly? Where would it make sense to go first? And have some of that information that also just helps with conversations moving forward with providers or contractors that you would want to invite in to possibly build on that kind of structure.
Kathy, have you found somebody to help you with Vetro?
Well, I have had several conversations with Tasha Johnson, the woman at the water district that Wendell suggested.
No successes. No.
She's interested, but she's also a little concerned, just what's the time commitment? And I've not been able to figure out more precisely. I don't know how much time this is. I mean, I think that there's an initial several-hour meeting, some training that goes on with that, and then it's individual work that we can sort of tailor to our own needs. Is that correct, Kendra Jo?
Yeah, I mean, I think it'll be as beneficial as people put time into it. And for some who are already coming in with kind of a background in this, it's not as much time. Right. But for others that are, newer, then it's probably having a weekly chat with Brian or Will and understanding if you're using it and it makes sense. Right. I'm happy to ask a couple of the towns that have been in the first cohort what they were hours that they were kind of putting into it for that product. I don't think that came up in the conversation that they had last week, but I'm happy to connect with Vinyl Haven and then a couple of communities in the Maine West area that were involved. So
yeah, thank you. I did have, at one of our earlier meetings, John had suggested, let's find out who was on the Swans Island committee because they were a part of that initial cohort. So I had a conversation just earlier today with the chairman of their broadband committee. And they did not engage too much with Vetro after all, because they were very engaged with Brian Lippold as their consultant to do a lot of work. So they were beyond the usefulness of Vetra. So we're coming in at the right time to make use of it anyway. And I've also reached out to Gordon Longsworth at COA, who does the GIS mapping program over there, to think, hey, you know, maybe he has some other ideas of this could be a great student project, for instance, to have somebody from COA engaged in this. And so we'll see where that goes, but I'm still hoping to have somebody else join me.
So, I mean, yeah, I can potentially help you with that, just with the knowledge that I have no GIS background and very little like network infrastructure background, but I write software, so maybe I can help just navigate a complex information system in general.
Thank you.
But I also want to say that I like Kendra Jo's idea. I think really our first few meetings have been so broad. We're kind of in this widening phase. And I think what we need to do maybe is just like identify what are our broad steps, like we're in like an information gathering phase. And so like what are we defining as the information we need? Like we have this Metro fiber map. We try to determine which people in the community still don't have coverage. We do some surveying. We kind of get that baseline, and then we can come up with a phased approach for the build out. And I also like, you know, if we know there is some starting point, which is fiber basically down Sound Drive to C Street, we know that if we know kind of we can bank that that's probably going to happen. We can use that as a launching point for, okay, maybe won't be very expensive to like blanket the business district with fiber to premises for business. Maybe that is one potential phase one. Or maybe we attack, you know, the people who would have no service. So that's probably going to be the hardest, but we don't have enough information to make these decisions yet. So it seems like we're naturally getting in this information gathering phase, but it might be good to kind of set some goals just in the information gathering so we can shape how do we know when we're done gathering the information to move on to the next step?
Yes, good question.
I have kind of two follow-ups to that. First is a little random, but Matt, do you know when your town meeting is going to be?
We are, I forget the exact date in May. It's around May 5th or 6th, somewhere in
Okay.
that point.
Virtual?
It will be a drive-in meeting again this year is the plan right now.
Okay.
It actually worked well last
It
year,
did work
so.
well.
I love it.
Everybody's honking their horn, you know, it's like a movie theater.
Yeah, and I'm wondering, you know, we've seen some communities utilize town meeting for just a straw man poll of what's the interest of the town voters in the community engaging or contributing funds to a broadband build in the future. Just, you know, you've got everyone going to one place for something and already answering questions, knowing that this is an opportunity to ask a question with no money involved, you know, no real standard, but getting something. And it's not a full survey, it's, you know, but figuring out what that like one question you might want. And then I don't know if Mount Desert has utilized that kind of thing before at town meetings, but we do have some communities that have found that fairly successful and kind of comforting to feel like they got an answer. They got community engagement in a way that was not as much of a heavy lift as, do we mail surveys? Do we email surveys? Do we call? Do we go door to door? So utilizing a straw man poll might be beneficial, just knowing that that's coming up soon.
Good idea.
I like that idea.
Yeah. Hello, Scott. Whoops, you're muted.
My apologies, I had to get a grandchild unexpectedly, so.
That's a good excuse.
Right.
All right, so we're talking about community engagement, where we should go, and the idea of when will we know we're done gathering information before we can make some decisions or recommendations. So one of the other gaps that information gaps was, what is the speed around town? And I'm wondering, we looked at that, the main Broadband Coalition map for speed testing, and we put out word everywhere we could. How often is that updated?
It's live.
It is, okay.
Yeah, so let's see, I can share my screen. I have it up because I was just in another meeting talking about it. So, this is what we're seeing.
So still not much for,
Pretty Marsh looks quite slow. Well, there's one data point.
Yeah. So fair point. This is that was the other question I have. Do you have how much consolidated do you have in Mount Desert?
I think most of the people who utilize Consolidated for internet were sort of in that western part of town, sort of where you're hovering over
Okay.
right now. Actually, sort of out in Scott's neighborhood, I think. And that's sort of where we did our expansion with Charter, that
Yeah.
general area.
So the only reason I bring it up is that we had a legislative update from Consolidated on Monday, I want to say, and they didn't get RDOF. They got RDOF funds for just a northern part, I think, in Southwest Harbor maybe, but they also have a strategic investment. Let me see if I can pull this up and share it. So let's see. You all see that? Very well, maybe. So they have a strategic investment. It's over $400 million, but $224 million is going into Maine. And their build time is 2022 to 2026. And so that this top one, this impact in Maine is actually what it is. RDOF isn't going to apply here because I think there was some Starlink RDOF funds, but not CCI RDOF funds. This investment is definitely an investment. It's for densely populated areas across the state, but we are still trying to, from what very little information they would give us about what they think is densely populated, we're trying to kind of go town by town and understand what they have on their timeline. So in a meeting the other night with Consolidated, he shared with the Eastport community that they have Eastport on their build timeline for 2025, and it'll be 1,000 premises of their 1,500 premises that they serve. And still leaving, the slowest of the slow where the premise density isn't there behind, but opening the door for the community to say, okay, what funding from the state or from us do we need to make that a full build instead of just the 1,000 premise build? So I feel like in every meeting I'm having with Consolidated, I'm starting to piece together what their work plan and timeline is, that they're not sharing as a whole, but they're sharing very slowly. And so when I think of MDI as an island, I do consider it to be a more premise dense area along the coast than other places. So it is going to be a community I'm going to ask Consolidated about, knowing that there is at least some there. My fear is that communities won't know until it's, until they're halfway down the path of something else, and then Consolidated does a fiber build. But the other is because Consolidated is doing some fiber upgrades, there's still that room to leverage community and state dollars to make that fiber upgrade bigger, right? If they're only focusing on, the 20% where there's premise dense, what does it look like to get diverse capital for the remaining 80% of the town?
Consolidated already has the most robust fiber network in the state already, since they're the #1 provider, reseller of internet to everybody in the state. They provide all the internet for all the cell phone towers. So this is an expansion to some degree, but they already have fiber on basically every pole in the state already. So
yeah, they definitely have the most robust backhaul, and this is going in and filling in those last mile infrastructure and replacing the DSL lines. It's why it's a major investment, but it's still it's not going to be to all of their customers by any means. It's only still to
It's
those
available,
premises.
and in the Northeast already, there's 3 or 4 people and businesses in town that have fiber connections with Consolidated already. It may not be at a gigabit
Sure.
because they don't want to pay for it, but it is fiber into their houses. So it is possible if you push at this point to get it.
Yeah, and so it's just I'm trying to make sure that communities are aware of provider timelines as well over the next, again, it's till 2026, so it's not tomorrow.
We had our first 3 Starlink accounts set up on the island this week. And they're kind of sort of working, sort of maybe kind of. It's better than what the people had prior, which was nothing. They're getting about a 40 meg synchronous connection currently for $100 a month. So that's a possibility, but they got a lot of money from the state as well. So.
We got a massive amount of money in the rural thing, like a lot of money.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, and they got $34 million just for Maine, and we're slowly seeing them roll out. We've had Swans has had a satellite directed at them for probably a month and a half now. Some customers have kept their services. Some have sent the infrastructure back, the equipment back. Most, what we've heard is when it's good, it's great. There's still the reliability issue.
They just don't have enough satellites, so they're going to need, probably a couple thousand more launches before they have enough satellites to cover as many people as they'd like to. But
oh yeah, RDOF alone, they need anywhere between 7,000 and 12,000 to
Right.
cover everywhere they got funding for.
right.
But I'm just gonna keep tabs on Consolidated and try to piece together where some of this is going. But it's just something I'm trying to flag for communities so they can consider. We don't always know provider timelines, but this at least gives us a small, 5-year window of what they're thinking.
Certainly a lot of money. Hopefully they'll come across with something.
This might be a good time to introduce this because Kendra Joe, I don't know that you know this, but we've had a project underway for a couple of years called our Main Street Project. And the idea was, a big part of this was to bury all of the electrical power lines underground. And then we changed that plan so that down Main Street in Northeast Harbor, they're going to still be poles on one side with wires attached, but then they're going to go down underground to the other side of the street. And that some of the work that goes along with this, some of the conduits have been put in place already on the opposite side of the street from the poles, but we haven't done the paving and the conduits under the road itself. And so we asked, at the Economic Development Committee, we asked, all right, what's the possibility of running fiber down there? Because Consolidated does go down there and Spectrum does go down there. What's the possibility of having fiber go there? So our town public works director wants to know, thinks we should have a conversation before he does much work in exploring that option. We should know where we would recommend going. And is that something that the town can decide, or is it customer by customer down the street that would be making those decisions?
I think at this point, my understanding was we're not talking about actually running the fiber itself, but just ensuring that there's enough conduit space that gets installed underground that we could run the fiber through. And that I think will probably depend on sort of where we end up with cost wise as this thing starts to wrap up. If there's some dollars left that were approved by voters, where it's looking that way, maybe we can install that extra conduit. I don't think it would be a great expense. You're just paying for the material. You've got the street dug up anyway.
Exactly.
But it is something we definitely should follow up on before Main Street is finally done. And because what's going to happen actually is once all the paving and everything is done, we basically put a 10-year moratorium on digging up Main Street because we don't want to ruin that nice
Come on, you always dig it up 2 months after you pave it.
I thought it was a 5-year moratorium.
It might be, but so it would be important to figure that out before then and follow up
Right.
with Tony.
Typically, when a conduit's put in, There should be a number of pull tapes and straps put in for pulling additional stuff, so that it can be done down the road, so.
Well, and so I believe since there are already Spectrum and Consolidated providers going down the road, there
they-
are conduits built
Right.
in for their services.
Right.
Do we need additional ones, or is it just a matter of what they're pulling through?
Well, if the conduit's been, dedicated to a particular provider, I know Spectrum does not like to share their conduit with anybody else, and neither does Consolidated. And of course, you can't for power. So if you were to have a third provider, if we're going to do our own fiber or something, you would want another conduit because neither of those other two providers would be willing to share theirs, unfortunately.
And right now, they have provided just two, one for electricity and one for telephone and data. And it did not distinguish, well, actually, I believe that we met with the people from Spectrum,
Yep.
not Consolidated on that.
Right. I mean, Spectrum will be glad to take all your business, so, but
So, do you,
some people will want Consolidated though because of, their allegiances, or they want a regular landline phone. They don't want a virtual
Right.
phone.
yeah.
And some alarm systems require a hard phone.
So as far as downtown Northeast Harbor Main Street goes, we would, if it's only one of those providers that has those conduits in place, because the others, the west side of the street has already been torn up and those conduits were in place, we would have to go with whomever has those conduits already there.
Correct. Yep.
Well, what about this idea of bringing from the town-owned fiber backbone from the high school? Wouldn't you want to lay some conduit for the town to use to complete that connection?
If there's any town stuff on Main Street, I think mostly the connection would probably be overhead going to the municipal building, and it's overhead going to the school.
Right.
Well, so I'm not sure if there's any town-owned facilities on Main Street.
And I would just say, if we are trying to leave open one option of the town owns some of the fiber network or all the fiber network,
Yep.
adding conduit now while the thing's open.
Yep,
is
that would make a
probably
lot of
not a bad
sense.
idea.
Even though PVC is expensive, it's a whole lot cheaper than digging it all up again.
Well, I was just reading Tony Smith's email to me, just like I got the other day. And he said that he infers that as it stands now, Spectrum will be stringing overhead wires on the new poles along the east side of Main Street and going underground to the west side.
So just Spectrum, not Consolidated.
That's what he says in his email.
Right.
And he wants to know, it sounds like if he explores, it could be that the Main Street Improvement Project would pick up the cost of it, possibly.
If they already have conduits underground and buried, it's probably not likely that they'd want to dig up and put another one in, right?
But they haven't dug under the street across, from one side
To the other.
to the other yet to do any of those conduits. I think that's coming this spring.
But the
potentially.
main feeder ones are in place already, like for power and Spectrum, you think there's two?
They
are-
have put conduits on the west side, at least at our property, they put in conduits already on the
Right.
west side.
Right.
And two conduits
Right.
that run along the sidewalk.
Yeah. Some of those buildings on the west side, I know, were historically served coming in their back way through overhead lines from at some point, but maybe that's an option too. I don't know.
So I guess
A
we
lot
need
of
to,
things- Oh, go
I'm
ahead,
sorry, I
Scott.
think I think Tony's waiting for some direction, maybe?
Right.
Hello, Lily.
Hi,
Hey,
sorry I'm late.
it happens.
Well, it was a very, very cold house. Let me just put it that way.
You got out quick. So,
Yes.
I think that kind of future proofing, we don't know what direction we would be going in. Why wouldn't we want to add conduits for the town's own use or for a different provider down in the future?
Right.
Whether it was Axiom or GWI or Consolidated.
Right. I know they do get fussy about, having their own conduit, so that
Right.
would be a smart move to have extra for sure.
I'm just also reading his email. He says, let me see, I think it looks like they would be exploring the option of in doing the fiber in lieu of cable,
Well,
running it down.
most of
And,
most of Spectrum's long haul stuff is fiber already, and then they just have kind of neighborhood stuff that's coax. But they probably would want to run fiber down Main Street for sure. And they'll probably leave some extra pull tapes in there to do future work as well. But
So I think at this point, he would just, I think he was worried about, he didn't want to interfere with the project of connecting the high school to the town office, but it sounds like, Wendell, that wouldn't be an issue.
no, that's probably, that's a whole separate thing. I mean, they could actually even do that with existing fibers if they got permission to use them.
So I don't think there's no harm, no foul to have him just explore it with Spectrum, is there? Just to see what the cost would be and see if the Main Street project would pick up the cost depending on the. Hey,
Right.
Wendell, just out of curiosity, if you're gonna run cable anyway, but you ran the fiber instead, is that an expensive proposition?
Most houses, newer house constructions, they're pulling fiber, I think I've seen a couple of them recently anyway that have done that. Fiber, the cost of fiber is not much. It's actually probably less than coax, but it's the skill to terminate it on the ends and
Right.
make connections afterwards. So it's not expensive in and of itself, no.
So should I tell Tony to go ahead and explore it?
I would, yeah. I mean, the town could pull some fiber through there on a conduit and just have it available, for whoever at some point. I mean, that's not,
Everybody,
you can buy 10,000 feet of 20 strand fiber for maybe $10,000. So it's not very expensive. Yeah.
okay. Everyone else okay with that?
Yes.
Okay, where are we now? Are we moving on or?
Yeah, I mean, we're still on the community engagement process. And so far, I think we should definitely do a straw poll at the town meeting in May. Are we gathering other info before then? Should we continue, or should we try a new route of getting more people to do speed tests so we could verify where we are and have service? And
We did publicize that to all the schools and encourage people to run that speed test just so that map would start to fill in. And I'm starting to see it fill in with more data. And it tends to be, of course, the people that are dissatisfied that are doing the tests. So that's good. We're getting some good data on locations that have crappy service. So that's good.
It's always good to continue to push always and then recognize that there are a lot of seasonal houses. So I know the partners behind the speed test, we did a really big push when it launched. We're doing some soft touches on it. And then probably around like May, June, we'll start to do another big push again,
Yeah,
knowing that people are coming back into their homes and coming into the state.
What about Lily and Kathy and Scott? If we were to get maybe the SRA to put something in their spring edition of their newsletter, alerting people maybe when they
That
come
would be good.
back.
I have a
Just for
link
the-
on the school's website. The town could easily put one on theirs. So
Yeah.
Well, Matt, I'm happy to reach out to Maggie. I'm not a part of the SRA anymore. I retired from them a couple years ago. so,
You're there in spirit.
to a certain degree, yes. Yes, I think that's a good idea. I think the other thing is, if we do put something or get either Maggie or Joelle to put something in the SRA newsletter, the other thing is, because I know that a lot of people, including my family's property, we go on super low internet for the winter because there's nobody in the house. So I do think that waiting until, waiting until people are back up local and have summer services up and going at their houses, you would probably gain a lot of traction.
Yes.
Good point.
And we can also reach out to, I can talk to Kate Chaplin at Knowles Rentals, because they do a lot of communicating, obviously, with homeowners who are renting their properties out between, in the town of Mount Desert, and maybe they could do a, a little push on that as well for their outreach to the rental population and homeowners who rent their properties out. So I'll try to do that as well.
Yeah, it might be they could post a verified speed test on the home rental.
That's true. I'm sort of thinking that while we have broadcast it via our Facebook and our newsletter, and we have, over 800 people on our newsletter list, I still think that maybe an individual email to people we know around town might get the best results. Here's a link, click on this, do your speed test, to go out to people all over town, just friends and acquaintances to get a better result. So
Yeah, the general results are, we sent out, I think, 600 emails, and from looking at it, we got about a 5% response on actually following through and clicking through the speed test. So
Hey, Wendell, one thing I'm wondering about too is, it's one thing, I mean, I think the average person sees something like that and they probably won't do that.
right.
That's why you're getting 5%, but I'm just thinking about like you and Coastal Computers, where you guys are out in the field, you're working with people's internet. If it could be kind of commonplace for George and you guys just to run, you're going to run, a lot of times you run a speed test anyway, right?
Yeah, I usually do for them, so I could certainly do that again. Now that we have the new data, I haven't been out and about as much as I have in the past, just because of, what's going on.
Right, but George, I think Coastal Computers, I
Sure.
think they're around a lot of places, don't you?
Yep. We could certainly ask him. He might be able to put a link on his site as well.
and I would be happy to take care of that and ask him to do it.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I have all of his technicians, whenever they're out in the field, they just,
Yeah, they may even have some data on that already. So
Is it okay to use the same computer to do it in multiple locations?
yeah, when it's a connection from the location you're at. For your truest data, of course, you have a hardwired Ethernet
Plugged
connection,
in,
but any data is better than none, basically.
yes.
Right.
Okay.
And just kind of to what Wendell said a little bit earlier is, even if you have good service,
Yeah.
right? Even if you have strong service, you live right next to that,
Right.
office for Spectrum, still run your speed test. The green data points matter too, especially when communities are starting to look at it.
I've done it at all the schools too. It kind of shows up as being, whoa, that's good internet. So that's good. Yeah.
hey, Kendra, Joe,
Yes.
where I came in late, and I don't want to go back, rehash everything, but just really quick, I understand about the Consolidated getting a lot of money to expand service. Did you or did you not say that they have like a 5-year plan that we can see where they plan to expand? Or not?
They have a 5-year plan. We can't see it.
Okay, that's too bad.
Yeah. So basically what I'm doing is every time I hear them mention to a community that they're on the plan, I write down the plan. So I'm starting to time out where towns are, especially to make sure that towns start doing work to offset what Consolidated's doing, because their investment is not going to be full community wide. It's going to be premise dense wide. So how can communities fill in, the rest of the gaps during that opportunity? They are, what I do know is they're going town by town. They're not going to start it really kicks off in 2022. They're not going to just go and disperse across the state everywhere. They're going to try to start and finish projects within towns. That's why when they talked to Eastport last night, they gave Eastport, this many premises of the 1,500 that we currently serve. And you're scheduled for 2025. The hope is it'll stay on schedule, but could be end of 2025, beginning of 2025. uncertain there, but they really are trying to do it
Yeah.
within that time frame.
What I've heard too is they're going to try to focus on the areas where they have a strong presence already and not to compete with a provider that's already there probably, but.
Yeah, and that's the other thing is we don't know how Spectrum, which is, or Comcast in Southern Maine, we don't know how those other providers, particularly cable providers, will respond to this telecom, doing fiber upgrades.
I know when we did, the town did the whole thing with Red Zone, you had to be very specific that they couldn't compete in the same market where Consolidated, or back then it was Fairpoint and
Yep.
Spectrum was. They couldn't receive the grant money to duplicate service, basically. So we'll see how that goes, but that was old. That was a few years back too, so.
To the straw man poll, Matt, I don't know if there's a timeline for getting some final worded verbiage on ready for the town to put forward at town meeting, or what that would look like. So if there's a timeline to consider for this committee, and then if there's just a couple people that would want to think through, exactly what that ask of the community is.
Right. I think, and actually it works out well because Kathy is on the warrant committee, and you happen to know the co-chair of that committee as well, her husband, Jerry. Where it's not an official vote of any kind, where it's not an official vote of any kind, there's not a real deadline. It's something, but I do think we have to be careful probably about how we word it and make sure we all agree, because that can obviously impact response quite a bit. But like I said, we're looking at shooting for the first week in May. So I think if we had a question together, we have a fantastic moderator at our town meeting who I'm sure would be happy to pose the question, and then some folks to count hands.
Well, and I wonder, maybe it should be after a discussion, but another option is everybody checks in. You have to sign in. And if we had a simple question, a yes or no question there, could we have everybody, straw poll vote just as they walk in the door and sign up?
We'll be walking in any doors, but.
Yeah. So
They
question
pull
on
in.
that, Matt, the town meeting,
Right.
is that also going to be Zoom, and is that an unlimited number of folks? Because I know at a couple recent town meetings, we had 100+ people.
And I knocked off.
Yeah. So I think if we do a really good job of broadcasting, this is a critical meeting for broadband, I think we'll get all of the, we'll get summer residents, we'll get everything, but the capacity for everyone to sign in is going to be essential.
The town meeting in early May, it will be the same format as last year, live
Drive-in,
at the
probably.
high school in cars.
Right.
An
Probably
outdoor
the
meeting.
drive-in up at the high school, I think.
But again, folks that may have may not be here,
Right.
is there an opportunity, both if you're going to have the live meeting, to also do Zoom? Because I think we're at that stage where you're going to have the broadest capacity to get people engaged and participate if it was dual.
I know the high school and the district, we just bought a new version of Zoom that allows for unlimited participants, and it does allow for polling and a few other advanced features. So that might be something the town could explore. It wasn't too much for education. I don't know if the town would want to explore that, but I could share some information for them. Yeah.
Legally, I think last spring we did. It was available on Zoom, or on YouTube rather.
Right,
Broadcast live.
we will do that again, of course, if need be.
Right.
But,
Although if you're not there present in person, you're not allowed to vote. So maybe even if we had something set up on the town website, and we could poll those that were there in person, and let those watching at home in the comfort of their own home know that go to the town website. There's a link you can click on to answer the poll yourself, or something like that.
maybe, yeah, like a form they fill out or something.
Yeah.
Just because I think we've woken people up to the ability to stay engaged and participate And I think we're doing a fantastic job getting away from that. I know we're being recorded, that interesting commentary that one hears in the summertime, like things are planned when we're not here, So I think that it would do a really, really good job to make some of these really important issues available for people to view and participate as best as possible. Anyway, I'm beating that horse bad enough.
It has been remarkable how many summer residents have tuned into meetings.
Oh, yeah.
Planning board. I've been on a couple of
Yep.
those, and it's wild. Yeah, some board members got kicked off because there was too many people engaged in the meeting.
Right.
So you're right. There's real value to that. That wouldn't be happening. So
Right.
we should consider this.
And I know that and Scott, you can, chime in on this, that the ability for people to be able to have good broadband so that they don't have to go home, they don't have, that they can run their life from here, no matter whether we're in a pandemic or not. That is one of the number one issues for the future.
Right.
So.
Yeah, I think I saw a poll recently that was something like 80 or 90% of people, that's their number one consideration. Wendell, real quick on Zoom, I don't know, is it possible through Zoom to put up like a poll question and have people click on an answer?
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay.
There's certain features there's different additions you can do, but there's polling and reactions and different stuff depending on what feature you subscribe to. Yep. So,
Okay,
yes.
what else?
Do a poll
Okay.
here, but we could test it out. Kendra, if we were to do something like that, is a straw poll better to have answered after a presentation and a discussion, or just a simple question that people answer sort of on the fly without an introduction to it?
Well, I think that's one, up to this, what all is going on at your town meeting. If there's room for you to give a 5-minute presentation before anyone, votes. The other that we've seen is utilizing as an opportunity to have a larger information meeting and just community information meeting and conversation the week prior, or, usually the week prior, not to get too far away from it. So it's still relevant to people, but utilizing as an opportunity to bring, voices into a virtual room in this instance, but to share information, to, continue to be transparent about what this committee is doing, and to start to gather feedback from the community about, what they're experiencing, what they're prioritizing, and just hear a little bit from them. And then it's fresh in their mind going into that meeting. So if you were to even just do like a quick minute introduction to that vote, at least, there's a good handful of people that heard a bit more previously. So I think it's different from community to community. Some communities, it's all fits in the town meeting and they're there for 6 hours. Because they have 5 to 10 minute presentations and then a vote and all of that. So I think it's up to this committee what's best. It definitely is a good opportunity, and I think come late April, you're probably due for a community information session, if not overdue. So just having the opportunity to talk to people and hear feedback and really understand what their priorities for the community are, and is broadband one of them? Would they be interested in hearing more? Is that something that they have the risk tolerance for? Is that the future of Mount Desert for them? Full fiber, regardless of cost, regardless of provider or anything like that. But what do they see? So I think it's definitely a conversation to have, and by that time it's definitely, at least just in my interaction, I would say it's time for a community conversation, first of many. Because things have changed. I mean, for those that were around in the Tilson conversations, right, that was X number of years ago. Things have changed. The way we use the internet has changed, and that's a good way to open it too. There are still definitely some valuable pieces from from that document, as well as it did progress some connectivity forward and was utilized in Spectrum conversations to fill in some of the gaps prior. You still know that there's gaps today. You know that those people that have access to 25.3 today, it still might not be sufficient for the way that their life has changed in the last year or the last 2 years. As more people work online, as we consume the internet differently, and as we become more producers of content for the internet, we are just a lot different than we were in 2015, 2016. So it's definitely an opportunity to engage from that angle, and let the community know that this is still an active conversation going on with a look towards, with an eye towards the future of this community.
Okay. I noticed that it's 5:02.
Yep.
We promised.
I just noticed that too. Yeah, so I have to go. I will connect you with Adam Quinlan at Tilson just
Thank
so
you.
that you can connect directly with him.
Okay.
And
So our next meeting is March 11th, so a month from today
okay, thank you.
at 4 o'clock.
So I have a quick question, not anyone can answer it. And this was probably in the notes that I missed or something, but is there anyone else that we should be talking to other than Tilson or in addition to Tilson to work up a plan? I know that Tilson has contained a lot of that information, but is there anyone that may be more nimble, more current or whatnot? I don't know. I mean, maybe Tilson still is the end all and be all of everything. But have we looked into who else might be a good partner to talk to?
So I can answer a little bit of this and then
Okay.
I'll hop.
Okay.
There are consultants. So you've got Mission Broadband, Casco Bay Advisors. I know that Brian Leopold's been mentioned here a couple of times. So, he's pretty involved in broadband planning in Maine. Some providers do provide, the planning, feasibility study, and drafting up various degrees of options, whether it's filling in the gaps, doing a phased approach, doing a full fiber, something that's municipally owned, something that's split between a provider and a community. Axiom Technologies is one of those that does some of that planning with communities as a consultant rather than in the without wearing the provider hat. Premium Choice, which is more of a Southern Maine community, does that as well. So there are a few options. And I think, knowing if you're in a situation where you want to rehash what all the options are again, or you want to start narrowing your focus down to a couple of options, right? Whether that's based on ownership model or financial model or the technology and equipment that you want to see in your community. I think starting to narrow your focus in on some of those aspects will help guide you to the type of consultant that you might need, or help guide that consultant to the work product that you're looking for. I think the one thing about the Tilson, it was a little bit of everything, right? So really, if you start to kind of narrow your focus down, whether it's between ownership or infrastructure, then the product that you get might feel a little bit more valuable for you to actually inform your community and inform your decision-making process moving forward.
And last question, I know you have to leave. Are any of your other major projects utilizing Tilson as their consultant that you're aware of?
That I'm aware of, no.
Okay.
There are a
Okay.
couple of communities that had a Tilson report from the 2015-2016 timeframe that have brought Tilson in just to update it, which is kind of what I mentioned to this.
Mm-hmm.
But not that I'm aware of on the consultant side of things.
Okay. Their name doesn't seem to be coming up much in the circles that I travel around in. And are we bringing up someone that left a slightly bad taste in everybody's mouth, or, have they cleaned up their act and will be able to perform, So anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think for the most part, some of their projects are in Southern Maine.
Yep.
But they're also a national company. So I don't know how much that they're doing in Maine from a planning process versus being more of the engineers behind the design later on.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you
Thanks.
all so much.
Thank
I'll
you,
see you
Kendra
next time.
Jo.
Much.
Thanks.
Thank you. Okay.
All right. I'm looking at the agenda, Kathy.
And we've covered it.
Yeah. Does anyone have anything else they need to add before we? So what are our next steps? I'm going to get back to Tony, right, to let him know to go ahead and explore.
Yep.
And-
Extra conduit, yeah, if possible.
And Kendra Jo is going to get Tilson in touch with Kathy.
And I'm going to reach out to George about speed testing.
Right.
And I would like to get maybe from Kendra, any additional information on what other consultants people are using. I know she just threw a couple of names out, but I do think that it may be worthwhile to call and talk to a couple of people, a couple of other sources. And if there's other communities that are like-minded communities that have used and had good experiences with other people, I think that way, I think we're really covering ourselves by, getting, talking to several people, but, I can be told no on that too, but.
Yeah,
I think the first thing any consultant is going to want to know is, what is it you want to do? And for that, we need to answer that ourselves with input from our neighbors and friends,
Yeah.
So I think that getting a survey of doing more of those speed tests for where do we stand right now? Where are there gaps? What's the speed? Who's slow? Who's happy? Then reaching out to, is this enough for you? The problem is you don't know what you don't know. And if somebody has crappy or mid-range service, they have no idea what what they might be capable of if they had great service. I would love to have some kind of an experiment to bring people who have mid-range service to somebody who has great service and say, okay, now watch this movie, now have this Zoom meeting, now do this, and see what the difference is so you can see what the possibilities are. That would be a fun demo to do, don't you think?
That would be good, yeah. Back when, hopefully we can have a place to do that at some point.
Well, exactly. Not by Zoom. Because if you're on the slow end, you're not getting it. So
Right. I mean, we could open we do have guest broadband available at each of the schools. I have it throttled back just to protect our services, but we could have a free-for-all weekend sometime, turn it up for a weekend.
wow. That could be a fun demo kind of thing to give people a sense of what the possibilities are if you had great service.
Right. I mean, the high school, certain parts of the high school have 10 gig service. Everybody has 1 gig service just because we don't have the super fancy equipment, but they're building a esports stadium at the high school that's going to have 10 gig service for a
Really?
competition for esports, I guess they're going to have in the fall. So
Esports.
esports as in electronic sports, yes.
I've got to learn more about that.
Instead of real football teams, they're going to have virtual football teams.
Really?
Hey,
Okay.
Wendell, did you send that link to all the committee members? I'm trying to remember. I don't think I've done it, so I should probably do it.
For the speed test, you can
Yeah.
you can get it right on the front page of the school's website. There's a place you can click on. and
Okay.
get there if you'd
Yep.
like. Yeah.
Well, that would be kind of a fun thing to do, don't you think? Of letting people try it out?
It's certainly something we could talk about, and I'd have to get permission, of course, but I could certainly arrange that. Since I'm the guy, I would have to get permission from. Sorry.
That's a good position to be in.
Oh, Wendell, would you give me permission to do this? Of course I will.
Wendell?
I would bounce it off of a couple other people just to make sure.
Well, because it does mean that people would be going into that space to use it, right?
Well, we've completed a project with COVID money where each of the schools has outdoor broadband within a range of every school so that you can just get into the parking lot and try it out. That's a possibility.
Really? So you could sit in your car, use the school broadband
Correct.
via hotspot or something.
Yeah, just, your laptop or whatever, like we've had at the library in different locations for quite a few years, so.
That would be great. And if you had a whole bunch of people on at once, would it ruin the,
Well, obviously, a pipe is only as big as so much you can
Right.
throw through it. If we get, generally on an average day, we have 3,000 to 4,000 users, and it hasn't slowed down yet. So wouldn't
Wow.
imagine on the weekend it would be a problem. So
so on a weekend would be better?
I would think it would probably be better. Yeah, you wouldn't have so many kids in classrooms watching YouTube when they're supposed to be working. Oh, did I say that out loud? Sorry.
I miss those days.
Remember, we're being recorded.
I was gonna say, we could just delete that off of the recording, correct?
Sorry.
All right, I think we're finished, would you say?
Thank you very much, everybody. I think we're making progress, slow but steady.
Taking I have to join another Zoom meeting at 5:30, so
All right.
Thanks, everyone.
thank you, everybody.
Great night.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Take care. Bye.